So we're going to turn that off. We got it nicely heated up, and now I'm going to strain it here. I've kind of set up a strainer into a measuring cup, and this is going to take just a little bit of time. So because we've got to strain out. First, I'm going to scrape out all of these things. But what we're going to do is we're going to let this sit and drip for a little bit. In fact, I may even get a little spatula and squeeze out the oil out of this, and that takes the medicinals out as well. Takes more of the medicinals out of the plant. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to be measuring how much oil I have, and then I'm going to add equal amounts of beeswax, grated beeswax. And now you don't have to grate the beeswax, but I recommend that you grate it because the faster it melts into the oil, the more medicinal qualities you will have in left. Heat does destroy the medicinal qualities. Now, what we're doing with the heat here is we're taking it from the plants and putting it into the oil. But once those plants are removed and they're not there anymore, there is nothing still going into the oil. So what comes out of the oil is not being replaced. So that is why I want, when I reheat this, I want to heat it as little as possible. So I can see I'm going to have probably just a little less than a cup and a half of oil, and it depends on how thick you like it. If you like your salve very hard, you put more beeswax in. If you like it a little bit more oily, you put less in, obviously. The beeswax is your binder. It's what makes it more of a salve than an oil. This is perfectly fine for healing. Beeswax does add its own healing. I'll clean this all up here too, but beeswax does add its own healing, but this is perfectly fine as an oil. It's just that oil doesn't cling to your skin as much as a salve does. So I'm going to let this sit. I'm going to scrape out the rest of the pan. I'm going to squeeze a little bit of this out with a rubber spatula. Okay, so we've done a rough thing here. We've got right around a cup and a half there, and we've got about a cup and a half of beeswax. So we've got, this is our infused oil with the chickweed, plantain, and comfrey here, and then the beeswax that we're going to melt into it. I've got 3 jars set up. Now, of course, if you're going to sell this or something, give it away as gifts, you're going to want fancier jars than this. I tend to like, when I make salves, to use wide mouth jars, but you know, you use whatever you have. And I'm just going to pour my infused oil back. We're slowly heating that up, and I'm just basically going to dump. Take me a second here because I'm trying to do it one-handed. Should all come out at once. One moment. So we have this in. My battery thing is beeping at me, so probably this won't last, but we're just going to melt this through. And it always seems like it's going to take forever to melt your beeswax in. You're like, oh my gosh, this is taking forever, and then all of a sudden it's like done. The second you no longer have any solid beeswax in, the second it all turns liquid, you pour it, you turn the heat off and pour it out. And as I said before, as you're heating something up, you're losing a little bit of the medicinal value. So you want to heat it as little as possible. So we are going to, as soon as it's heated up enough to have that wax melted and incorporated into the oil, so that we're going to turn the heat off and pour it into our cooled jars. Now, of course, or into our sterilized jars. Now, of course, you're going to want your jars to be able to take the heat. You are heating up 2 flammables, olive oil and beeswax. Both are flammable. Beeswax flames out at 400 degrees, and olive oil a little bit lower than that. So it's not something, you're not going for that. All you're trying to do is just melt it enough, and beeswax melts at 110 degrees. So, but you're still wanting to be careful. Make sure that it doesn't get too hot. Don't walk away from this. This does have a few potentials to be dangerous. So anyway, I'm going to melt this out because I think my battery's about dead, and I'll show you that in just a minute. Well, you can see here we're coming down to where the beeswax is incorporating, and like I said, 1 minute you'll be like, oh my gosh, this stuff is never going to melt, and you'll be like stirring and stirring, and then all of a sudden it will just start melting, and that's when, of course, it gets to that 110 degrees. So we're at that stage here, and the beeswax is melting. I have set the jars on top of a cloth. This is mainly just to protect everything. 110 degrees isn't that hot, but it is still got some heat to it. So I just don't want to break the glass of my cutting board or break the glass of the jars. Okay, we're done. And basically from here we just pour it straight into our glass jars. Again, this is going to be for my home use, so I'm not putting into any fancy things. I did put it into a wide mouth jar, but I'm not putting it into any fancy things. I'm going to get this into the wash here, get it cleaned up real quick, and I'll be right back. So we've put it into the jar and it's starting to cool, and this one's cooling from the bottom up. Sometimes they cool from the outside in, sometimes they cool all at once. It just depends on, you know, it just depends, I guess, on how cold the air is. I've often had students that have seen this where, you know, they see the bottom layer getting hard, or they see it, you know, the outside layer getting hard and then the inside layer is still liquid, and they're like, oh no, mine's separated. It's not. Give it time. If you're really in a hurry, you can stick it in your freezer or in your refrigerator, or like tonight here is going to be below freezing, so I could stick it outside. I don't worry too much about that. I'm just going to close it up and leave it, you know, let it harden on its own. The less you jostle it, the more perfect it looks. So if you're selling it or if you're giving it away as gifts, you want to just pour it in and just not touch it, not jostle it. Just let it, you know, find its own level and dry or harden in a nice even top like this. Then of course you want to label it. You want to label it the day that you made it. If you started it the day before, I label it the day I finished it, such as a lot of my black salve. I will start the day before and I will work it overnight, and then I will label it the day that I finished it. And then I also put all the ingredients that it's in it, because sometimes my black salve has one thing in it, and next year it may not, it may have something different. Depends on, I tend to harvest wild edibles more than I have, wild medicinals more than I have medicinals in my garden, though I do have plenty of medicinals in my garden. So depending on the year, one wild medicinal may be available, and the next year another one may be available. So I do write the ingredients down, and that's on, I usually put it on the lid, but you can also put it on a label on the side of the jar. If you are looking, if you're a beginning healer and you're you know, looking for the basic in salves, this is it. Chickweed and Plantain, and with mine is Comfrey, and those three ingredients make the basic salve. This is good for healing just about anything: diaper rash, chapped lips, chapped hands, cuts, you know, dry skin due to winter, anything on that order. This is really good at healing it. You can add other things to it. Like I said, yarrow has the antimicrobials, so does, trying to go through my head here, calendula, which you can grow in your own garden. And these ones will help kill off and protect you from any microbials that might be in the air. Then you have your antibiotic cream, which would be with like golden seal or barberry root, golden thread, Oregon grape root, anything on that order would be an antibiotic cream. But this basic here is, if you're new to healing, you can see how easy this was. This is not something that you sit there and worry about, oh, am I going to get it right, am I going to get it wrong? Very simple. If you don't have enough beeswax, then you make it a little bit more oily. If you put a little bit more beeswax in than oil by accident, then you make it a little harder. Or you can do it just that way because you want a harder salve. Traveling, if you're using it for traveling, you might want it harder, because the beeswax will melt a lot. If in a heated situation, this is going to heat up at around 120 or so degrees, 110, 120 degrees. It's going to start melting. So, you know, in a travel case, probably don't want that. So if you put in a little more beeswax, that'll make it harder to melt. Once you render the beeswax, every time you melt the beeswax, it makes it a little harder to melt the next time. So anyway, very basic salve. Chickweed, Plantain is your basic salve, and still an excellent salve. The Comfrey I added because the Comfrey helps regenerate tissue. Externally it's great. I use it internally all of that's controversial. Please look that up for Comfrey. But very, very excellent basic salve, and anybody can make it. I mean, most people have Plantain. Both common and English Plantain works very well. There's tons of different kinds of chickweed all over the world, so feel free, or any kind of giant chickweed, mouse-eared chickweed, any kind of chickweed works. So and both of these are wild, free, growing out in your backyard. A vegetable oil and some beeswax will work fine. If you don't have vegetable oil, use some lard or some suet, some kind of fat on that order. Never use butter. Not too big on butter because it would go rancid too fast. But you can see this is getting harder and harder. But like I said, basic oil. You can do it. You can make something this simple, very inexpensive to make, and it works. And that's what's important, is how well it works. So I'm going to let this harden, and I'm going to label this, and I'm going to have myself my Chickweed, Plantain, and Comfrey salve. For 2012, this will be my home use here. This works great for animals, because if an animal was to eat this, it wouldn't hurt them at all. So, I use this on my horses. I use it on cattle if they get a little abscess or something. This is, like I said, basic salve, perfect for use, very easy to make, very inexpensive because it's growing right out in your yard.